The opinion polls commissioned by TVN24, TVP and Polsat significantly overestimated the vote for the Civic Coalition and differed significantly from the final election results, which turned out to be better for law and justice. The gap between us and the Civic platform has increased. If the election results from the local assemblies were translated into parliamentary seats, Law and Justice would receive one more seat. Other parties also gained, but the left suffered huge losses, shedding as many as 11 seats. The situation is even more interesting when we compare the winners of the elections to the district councils in voivodeship terms. Law and Justice wins in 10 voivodeships, the Civic Coalition in 6. The situation in the largest cities is in favour of Civic platform. Law and Justice wins in smaller towns and villages. There is no shortage of surprises. It turned out that there are cases such as Rzeszów, where contrary to exit polls, our candidate entered the second round, or Warsaw, where it turned out that Tobiasz Bocheński achieved a result 5% higher than predicted by pollsters. The electoral result of Law and Justice strengthens the position of Jarosław Kaczyński's party. Earlier, there were many voices that the party would start to lose support, but it turned out differently. Law and Justice's success is the fact that it has maintained its public support in unfavourable conditions, in a situation where there is opposition and no access to public media. But as the professor points out, to gain power, Law and Justice first needs to expand its own electorate. Secondly, obtain greater coalition capability, because so far, as practice shows, these capabilities are quite limited. What do polls think about the election results? People tend to look for good and fairness. Law and Justice has its cast-iron electorate, and these people never fail, that's all. They did not lose, did not gain, and keep these people faithful. Tusk is a liar and a cheater. He lost these elections and will keep losing. Promises, promises, and nothing delivered. This is the 9th victory in a row for Law and Justice. This result shows that perhaps we could have much more in Parliament, perhaps get power. Andrzej Śliwka will fight for the presidency in Elbląg. People know me here and know I'm reliable, and I'll do anything to not fail. Meanwhile, the ruling coalition is coming apart at the seams. Left MP Anna Żukowska tried to explain the poor results of the left. In her opinion, voting was more difficult for voters, especially the left. Quite complicated. I mean more complicated than the parliamentary and presidential elections because they are multi-level. You get 5 ballot papers, for example. Therefore, the leader of the new left, Władimir Czarzasty, loses his chance to become the Speaker of the Sejm as part of the agreement with the Civic Coalition and the Third Way. The poor result of the left, which was overtaken by Konfederacja, encouraged the leaders of Polska 2050 and PSL to change the agreement concluded last year. Only a year ago, at the beginning of the 2023 general election campaign, the issue of high fuel prices was a useful stick with which to beat the Conservative government. At that time, challenger Donald Tusk promised that if he were to become Prime Minister, the gasoline price would be reduced to 5.19 Polish zloty per litre. Asked today what he'll do about rising prices, Donald Tusk answered, "I'm not responsible for gasoline prices because it is not the Prime Minister's decision." Drivers still scratch their heads when looking at fuel prices while refuelling. Very expensive. After all, prices are getting closer to 7 zloty per litre of petrol or diesel. But this horror was supposed to end. The change of Prime Minister to Donald Tusk was to have been enough. These prices may be lower. I have a very specific solution that could make gasoline costs 5 zloty today, and it's not a miracle. In February, we asked about the specific solution Tusk was supposed to introduce. By the end of March, we should have answers about what actions are possible within the company to keep fuel prices lower than they are now. March has passed and no response, so we asked today, do we already know what these possible actions are, if they exist at all, and when will this one simple decision to make fuel at 5 zloty 19? Well, you are being vicious in a very consistent way, but I am just quoting you. Yes, when I said it, of course, and I can repeat it, and please check the circumstances. When these words were said, at that time gasoline could cost 5.19. Now oil prices are 20-30% higher and rising. I'm not responsible for gasoline prices because it is not the Prime Minister's decision. However, during the campaign, Donald Tusk said something completely different. A journalist asked me a question. If you were Prime Minister, how much would fuel cost? After 5.19, I can repeat it today. Yes, petrol will be at 5.19, and I say this today with full responsibility. Truly, believe me, I was the Prime Minister. I know what these mechanisms are. All it takes is one simple decision for petrol in Poland to cost not more than 6 but 5 zloty. Let us remember that it was Tusk as a candidate for Prime Minister and here already as Prime Minister. I am not responsible for petrol prices because it is not the Prime Minister's decision. So why did you promise fuel for 5 zloty then? If you can't influence it, what was the point of making the promise then? I can repeat it once again. I said that fuel should cost 5 zloty 19 in Poland when I said these words. You were supposed to do that. When you are Prime Minister, fuel will be cheaper. I'll ask another interlocutor. You won't enter conferences if you're shouting, you know. We're being threatened by Tusk's co-worker who runs a conference. Tusk's uncomfortable questions are infuriating. What do drivers think about the Prime Minister's approach to his promises? What would you answer Donald Tusk? That he lied and that we want it cheaper. I think you know perfectly well how. The Prime Minister cheated on us. What is our Prime Minister like? I don't know if he cheated. I know he can promise a lot. And deliver? Not always. Donald Tusk is once again cheating voters. Subsequent promises from the election campaign certainly turn out to be big lies. This was the case when it comes to 100 specifics, and it is also the case with gasoline at 5.19. Today, Tusk tried to defend himself with higher prices for a barrel of oil on world markets. It's just that when he made the promise of fuel at 5.19, a barrel of oil was more expensive than it is today. The dollar exchange rate was also higher than today, and these are among the elements that influence the price at gas stations. Looking only at the economic factors that operate today or have operated over the last 2 years, today we have a much easier situation for the operation of the energy market and for the operation of energy companies. This means that it is easier to reduce gasoline prices today than it was 2 years ago. But Tusk was not Prime Minister at that time. What could Poles count on today if Tusk wanted to fulfill his promises, at least partially? I think it could be closer to 6 zloty, 5.99 if it were lowered, 6.20 at the moment. It seems to me that it is real. I don't want to speak responsibly here without having internal data, mainly from Orlen, which is the currently on table of possible reductions. And yet one simple decision was enough, and the fuel was to cost 5 zloty. Adrian Borecki, Telewizja Republika. Germany's agriculture minister welcomed a provisional agreement on restrictions of Ukrainian food imports, which some European Union members say have destabilised the bloc's agricultural markets. European Union lawmakers and Belgium, which holds the 6-month rotating EU presidency, said on Monday that they had reached a deal on the curbs. This will still require approval from other EU members and the European Parliament. The European Union's Agricultural Commissioner, Janusz Wojciechowski, also said the bloc's Executive Commission had met farmers' representatives on proposals to reduce the administrative burden on farmers under the EU's Common Agricultural Policy, which he said had been well received.
Just before this meeting, we had the meeting with the farmers' representatives, protesting farmers from many countries in the European Union and also Belgian farmers. And our proposal of simplification are approved by the farmers. This is not the older problems, not solving of the older problems of farmers. For example, the economical problems of farmers, the decrease of the prices, but the simplification of the administrative burden is very important. And I'm happy that the farmers received well the Commission proposal.
EU decision-makers have wrangled for weeks on limits to tariff-free access for Ukrainian produce as farmers protested against cheap imports, with some in Poland blocking the border with Ukraine and spilling Ukrainian grain across rail tracks.
A second topic we have dealt with is that which was agreed yesterday, restriction on Ukrainian food imports, the agreement in the trilogue between European Parliament, Commission and Council. I very much welcome this compromise. Germany greatly supported it, and our interest was on one hand that we ensure Ukraine can continue to export agricultural products where they are urgently needed to their destination countries in the south. Wheat was exempted. We have acted for that. I find the compromise as a smart one that brings together the interest of agriculture in the European Union and on the other, the interest of Ukraine.
New rules to handle irregular arrivals of asylum seekers and migrants to the European Union change everything regarding asylum applications, an analyst said ahead of a debate and vote by lawmakers in the EU Parliament on the package. The laws include screening irregular migrants when they arrive in the bloc, procedures for handling asylum applications, rules on determining which European Union country is responsible for handling applications, and ways to handle crises. The new rules will change both how asylum claims are processed and the reception of asylum seekers. Migration researcher Alberto Horst Neidhardt said.
The rules will change everything, and will change everything from the very beginning. When a person will enter the EU irregularly to file an asylum application, the rules that govern the processing of the application itself will change. More persons will be subject to border procedures at the EU's external borders, but also there will be changes to the rules governing the reception of asylum seekers. So what their longer-term prospects are in the EU, how member states will support their integration within member states, and also the longer-term prospects for them and their longer-term stay in the EU.
Under the new system, countries not at the border will have to choose between accepting their share of 30,000 asylum applications or paying at least €20,000 per person into a European Union fund. The screening system envisaged will seek to distinguish between those in need of international protection and others who are not. Migrant arrivals in the European Union, a wealthy bloc of some 450 million people, are way down from the 2015 peak of more than 1 million. Over 45,500 people have entered the European Union so far this year, outside of regular entries, United Nations data showed. In the run-up to the European parliamentary elections, in which far-right parties are expected to gain ground, the European Union's Executive Commission and heads of states have portrayed the deal as a breakthrough. But human rights groups have said the reforms will put people seeking refuge in the European Union at risk.
We all know that European elections will take place in June of this year, so the co-legislators, the Parliament and the Council, were under immense pressure to find a solution, but also there is a general impression that without a common solution to some of the problems affecting European migration and asylum system, this issue was only going to get worse. And so some of the political parties that have been mobilizing their forces around the migration issue, especially on the far right, were considered a threat from this perspective. So a solution had to be found, and the co-legislators therefore decided to find a compromise, which is going to be difficult to of course, also set in place and to implement.
Neidhardt said the new system was very complex, and there was concern that EU members would seek to reduce the number of irregular arrivals through deals with third countries. One of the main concerns for critics is that the agreement introduces a new expedited border procedure for those deemed unlikely to win asylum to prevent them from lingering inside the bloc for years. Their claims will be dealt with in a maximum of 12 weeks, and if rejected, they should be returned to their home countries within a further 12 weeks, the deal says.
When looking at the long-term implementation of these rules, there is a lot of uncertainty. The system which is about to be set in place is also very complex, and so there is also a concern that in this context member states will do what they can in order to reduce irregular arrivals, to not overburden their national asylum and reception system. So there is also a prospect where we will see more of what we have already seen in the past years, so more partnership with third countries in order to reduce arrivals and then also return persons who don't have the right to stay in the EU.
And while Wednesday's vote is seen as final, it will still need to be formally agreed by member states in the European Council.